welcome back to Sefer Ezra Nechemia. We are continuing in Perek Bet. We stopped in the middle of Perek Bet, and the last pasuk that we saw last 2 weeks ago was a very, very difficult pasuk to read. For me, very, very difficult. I'm going to go back. Pasuk Yud, right? We ended with pasuk Yud, and basically I'm going to read it. Vayishma Sanbalat HaChoroni v'Tovia ha'Eved ha'Amoni vayera lahem ra'a gedola asher ba'adam levakesh tova livnei Yisrael. In a nutshell, what we studied in the last class we had, Perek Bet is the chapter where Nechemia comes hears what's going on in Eretz Yehuda, in Yerushalayim, and he very politically convinces Artaxerxes, the king, to let him go. He was the cupbearer, a very important minister to the king, to the Persian king Artaxerxes, and he convinces him to let him to free him from his job and let him go down to Eretz Yisrael, go up to Eretz Yisrael, and help the Jewish people elevate themselves spiritually and both also for the physical point of view to really rebuild Yerushalayim. But we saw that he does not mention Yerushalayim not even once. Doesn't mention the word Yerushalayim, the name Yerushalayim, not even once. And also we saw in the Psukim that it's a very delicate matter. And he didn't just, go over to Artaxerxes and say, hey, free me, let me go. But timing was key. He ensured that Artaxerxes was in a very good mood, right? We mentioned he was drinking, he was with many women, he was in a good mood, which would have allowed him to release Nechemia to go to Yerushalayim, although he doesn't know it's Yerushalayim. It's basically, Nechemia said, the place where I come from. And the king who loves Nechemia is in charge of his wine, to make sure that he's not poisoned, wants also Nechemia to be happy, so he lets him go. And I'm not going to go through all the different complexities that we saw 2 weeks ago, but he comes down to Yerushalayim. And the first thing we just read in Pasuk Yud is that these two figures, Sanbalat HaChoroni, who was the governor of the northern borders of the Shomron, and Tovia ha'Eved ha'Amoni, he was the governor of the east of Yerushalayim, of where Ammon is. They heard that there's somebody coming to Yerushalayim to do good for the Jews, to do positive things. And that they didn't want. They weren't interested in having anybody do anything good for Am Yisrael. And I said that's a terrible thing because there are people like that in the world, total evil people, Reshaim, that when they smell, when they there's a scent of anything good happening to another human being, they have to tear it down, especially to Am Yisrael. And that is something very hard to hear. And the reason is because, unfortunately, ever since we read this 2 weeks ago, every so often I go on to Ynet. Ynet and Arutz Sheva are the two digital news internet sites that I go to on my phone. It's all I really go to. And unfortunately, many times there are clips that you can see what's going on in the Knesset, right? And everyone knows in the last couple of weeks, there were different laws that were up for to vote upon. And you can see people didn't want to vote, not because they didn't believe in it, it's because they didn't want to do good for the other side. They didn't want the other side to have anything good marked. There's a lot of politics there, so I don't want to go too much into politics, but we can see that there are definitely people like that in the world who, anytime anything good is happening to someone else, they have to tear it down. And that's really who Sanbalat HaChoroni is and Tovia Eved Amoni. When they hear somebody wants to do something good for Am Yisrael, no, we have to tear that down. It's also anti-Semitism, very, very pure anti-Semitism against Am Yisrael. It's very, very sad. But as I mentioned also on Shabbat, anti-Semitism really comes, the worst form of anti-Semitism comes from within, from our own people, from the Jewish people. We saw that. I mentioned on Shabbat, between Mincha and Ma'ariv, I gave a little drasha on the words, Beha'alotcha et hanirot, where Aaron gets the mitzvah of going up and lighting the candles. And the Ramban there says something very interesting. He says, to the question that Rashi poses is, Aaron was very sad that he didn't get to give a gift to give to the Mishkan like all of the other 11 Shvatim. Shevet Levi didn't really get a chance to give anything. So Aaron was very sad. So Hashem gave him this extra mitzvah to go ahead and light the candles in the Mishkan. And the Ramban says that mitzvah was better was more accepted, was more prestigious than the gift that the other Shvatim gave. And the Ramban asks why, what is so unique about it? And he answers, because in the future, there's going to be another type of lighting that will save Am Yisrael, and that is the lighting of Chanukah, another type of Chanukat HaMishkan, namely Chanukat HaMikdash, when the Chashmonaim, the Maccabim, go ahead and they light the candles in the Beit HaMikdash during the time of Antiochus. And I gave an entire shiur basically saying that the whole downfall of the time, the period of the Chashmonaim really wasn't from the outside, it was from the inside. Jews wanted to be like the Greeks, and they wanted to bring in idols. They wanted to bring in the Western culture. They wanted to ruin the Jewish faith. And when Antiochus saw that the Jews are doing it to themselves, he said, "Great, I'm gonna follow through." And that's really why there was a downfall, and why there was a need for a nes. And that nes was Aaron HaKohen's sons who went up and lit the candles. So we see really that there are people that really want just to harm Am Yisrael, but really, right now we're talking about Ezra Nechemia, not Aaron HaKohen. And he comes to Yerushalayim, Pasuk Yud Aleph. He comes to Yerushalayim, and he has one goal in mind. We saw that last parak, and also in the beginning of the parak. He wants to rebuild Yerushalayim. He wants to give Am Yisrael a sense of bitachon atzmi, a sense of confidence that they can actually go ahead and live in Yerushalayim and rebuild, continue to rebuild the spiritual aspect that Ezra helped them with. Now he wants to be the governor that goes ahead and rebuilds physically Yerushalayim. So Pasuk Yud Aleph, Va'avo el Yerushalayim, va'ehi sham yamim shlosha. Right? He comes to Yerushalayim and he's there for 3 days. There's an emphasis on 3 days. When we were learning the book of Ezra, it took Ezra a couple of months before he did anything. Here, 3 days. Nechemia, unlike Ezra, is a man of action. He jumps right to action. Not 3 days passes and he already gets to work. Pasuk Yud Bet. Va'akum laila, ani va'anashim me'at imi, ולא הגדתי לאדם מה אלוהי נותן אל ליבי לעשות לירושלים. ובהמה אין עמי כי אם הבהמה אשר אני רוכב בה. So Nechemia doesn't tell anybody about his plans. He doesn't tell anyone what God wants him to do. As you recall, in the beginning of the parak, we said that Nechemia prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he's answered. Shem says, "Go ahead. Go down, I'm giving you my blessing." So he doesn't tell anybody what transpired and how he was inspired by God to go ahead and rebuild Yerushalayim. And what he does is, in the middle of the night, he gets up, he goes out, he takes just a few men with him, and only one animal that he rides himself. We'll see in a minute why. Probably a donkey or a mule, something like that he was riding on. And he goes ahead in a clandestine, secret way, and he takes a night tour, and he wants to go around the walls of Jerusalem. Now, we know why. We know that his entire intentions, as we saw before, is he wants to make sure that he knows ahead of time how much money he needs to repair the broken walls, those that were burnt down in ruins, rubble, in a wreck since the time of since dating back to Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, all the way through the times where the Shomronim didn't allow Shesh Betzar and all those to build the Beit HaMikdash. If you recall, we discussed that in the beginning of Sefer Ezra. And therefore, he as a politician knows that he's up for opposition. He knows that Sanballat and Tobiah already mentioned that they don't want anything good happening to Am Yisrael. So if he would go in broad daylight, going around, taking notes and be seen by all these people, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to start complaining. And then what are they going to do? They're going to write a letter again to the king Artaxerxes and say, look, the Jews are trying to rebel against you again. Maybe halt all measures of work. Don't let them rebuild. The same way it was done, if you recall, during the time of Shavei Tzion, when they first came to Yerushalayim, they started building, and then again it was halted by by Kanbuzi, you recall, the son of Koresh, only until the time where Dariavesh allowed them to rebuild and to regain the work. So here the same thing. So Nechemia is very intelligent. He's a very swift politician, and he realizes that for him to make sure that he can get ready properly before anybody can say anything, he needs to do it at night. He needs to do it in secret and not take a lot of people with him. Again, he doesn't also know who to trust. He's brand new. He just came down from Bavel. He has great intentions, but he doesn't know who he can trust. So he just takes a couple of people with him and just one animal. He doesn't want to make a lot of noise, but the animal has to also be able to tread rocks and rubble, because that's really where he's going, is going around the walls. And where does he go? Pasuk Yud Gimel. Va'etzea b'shar Hagai laila, again at nighttime. Ve'el pnei ein hatanin ve'el shar ha'ashpot. Va'hi shover bechomot Yerushalayim asher hem prutzim u'sh'area u'klu va'esh. Right? Absolutely, he sees absolutely no upkeep. The walls are in ruins. Possibly on purpose, it wasn't really rebuilt, because there's an idea that we mentioned back in the Sefer Ezra, that the nations around didn't want there to be a wall surrounding Yerushalayim, because they wanted commerce. They wanted to be able to come at any time. They wanted to be able to leave any time. They didn't want to have any restrictions because of all the Mekach Umemkar, all the commerce. They didn't want to be able to be restricted by anything. So there was no reason really to rebuild. The second you build a wall, basically building a fortress, means you're keeping people out and keeping people in as well. So there was no reason for them to want to build. But Nechemia, they wants to rebuild Yerushalayim, the Jewish quarter. We'll see, I'll show you some maps in a minute. It's very important to him, and he sees what ruin exists. And he mentions Chomot Yerushalayim again. Right, he didn't mention it ever since he spoke to Artaxerxes in Shoshan Abira, because he didn't want to, God forbid, he didn't want to awake what happened previously historically. What I want to do is I want to show you a map. Very interesting. I really researched the different walls that exist around Yerushalayim. And when we say that he's going around, Nechemia is going around the walls of Yerushalayim, which Yerushalayim are we talking about? How big is Yerushalayim, and what walls, right? We know, for all those who come to visit, who see the walls of Yerushalayim from their apartments, or where they visit often, or, every time you go to Yerushalayim, you see the walls, you see Shar Yafo, you see Migdal David, and you see the walls as you go down to the Kotel. So I want to show you a couple of maps, basically 3 different walls that researchers have been able to excavate and really put together some type of timeline of when they were built and the size of the walls. So I'm going to share my screen and show you the first. Here we go. Well, in front of you, you see a couple of pictures. You see a couple of pictures that were drawn by different artists of trying to be Ne'eman, trying to really portray the psukim, where you see one donkey, you see just a couple of people, you see Nechemia and the donkey, really going through and seeing the ruins of Yerushalayim, the ruins of the wall of the city of Yerushalayim. Here's another very famous one as well. I forgot the name. I had it written down, but it says Paisan in the I can't remember. Anyway, but you see here, it's done very quietly, just to not make any noise. But you can see in the background, if you see over here, if you see I'll put my laser. You can see over here, kind of like smoke and fire. And the idea that was trying to be portrayed here is that the ruins, ever since Churban Beit HaMikdash, even though Beit HaMikdash Hasheni, the second Beit HaMikdash, has already been built, there's no real bitachon. There's really no sense of Jewish realm, Jewish independence. It doesn't really exist. There's still a hint of a churban, a hint of ashes, a hint of rocks and rubble and smoke. And that's really what Nechemia is trying to fix. Ezra that we saw already in the first Sefer, his aim, his goal was really to first and foremost build the spirituality of Am Yisrael, bring back the Torah mitzvot, not necessarily the physical atmosphere of Yerushalayim. He said first we have to build the ma'oz, that would be a central place for Torah mitzvot. And we need the Beit HaMikdash. So the Beit HaMikdash was, as we saw, he repaired the Beit HaMikdash, but not the walls, not the city itself. Nechemia comes from a different point of view. He says the way to really rebuild is first physically build your house, build your home, be secure for where you live. So I want to show you for a minute. I took this off of Wikipedia, and I'll explain what we're seeing in a minute. But what you can see here, you know what, let me just make it a little smaller. So you can see a little bit better. Yeah, okay, so as you can see here, this is basically the walls that we're talking about. Now, I'll show you a better map in a minute, but this gives you kind of 3 dimensions so you can see what's going on here. Yerushalayim is much bigger. Ir Atika, as you can see, the walls on the bottom is an existing walls that we have today during the Ottoman walls. But the walls of Yerushalayim that we're talking about is really just this. That's really what it is. Okay, I'll make it a little bigger so you can see. This is it. This is what we're talking about. So the Beit HaMikdash is up here, Har HaBayit, and the Jews are really, this is the original Jewish quarter during the time of Ezra and Nechemia. All of the other houses that you see here are non-Jews. They're other people living around. They're the mixed marriages that Ezra encountered and that Nechemia will continue to encounter. This is Shar Hagai. We mentioned here in Pasuk Yud Gimel that he starts in Shar Hagai. He starts in Shar Hagai. If you go to Pasuk Yud Gimel, Vayetzeah b'Shar Hagai Laila. There's a little shar over here to get into the city over here, Shar Hagai, and over here Shar Ha'ayin. So basically, he was walking. I'll get my laser again. He basically walked from this area here. You know, that's why he needed a donkey to be able to walk through the entire rubble here and really take notes of all the areas that is really broken down, for him to be able to properly understand what the cost is going to be, because don't forget, he doesn't have a lot of money, but he needs to he's cost efficient. He wants to make sure what is necessary and what is not necessary. So therefore, he's starting small, just the Jewish quarter. Okay. What I do want to show you now is the 3 walls that I discussed. So the first that we just saw here, this is basically Har HaBayit, and this is Ir David. And this is the original Jewish quarter of Yerushalayim. This is Yerushalayim, the first wall that was built by Nechemia. Okay. Now I wanted to build upon this, what we have today. But beforehand, I wanted to show you. So this is, you can see on the left, the red is the Nechemia wall that he rebuilt. The green and the purple that we'll see in a minute is the second wall during Beit Sheni that was built by the Hashmonaim / Herod, because we're not really positive, archaeologists not really positive where one began and the other continued, but this is pachot or yoter how it looked, right? So this is basically the green was the second wall built after the red wall that was built by Nechemia, and then the green wall was built more or less by the Hashmonaim, and Herod basically built more, he expanded Yerushalayim to be, which is the purple one, and then Agrippas. I put a question mark there again because it's not positively Agrippas. It could have been some of the other kings, but they basically expanded Yerushalayim much more. So this is what you see here, and again, this is a Beit HaMikdash. Now in black, I'll show you in a minute. In black, the Ottoman Empire, what we have today, this is what we have today. The black that you see in front of you is Yerushalayim Ha'ir Atika, divided into 4 quarters. So the black again is from the Ottoman Empire. That's what we have today. The Christian here. I put all the different quarters. Sha'ar Yafo is over here, and as you know, Sha'ar Yafo on the left of Sha'ar Yafo is the Christian quarter. And as you go deep into Sha'ar Yafo, you go through the different Sha'arim. You get to the Shuk, the Arab Shuk. So basically, this is the entire Muslim quarter over here. The Jewish quarter over here and the Armenian quarter over here. Sha'ar Tzion is over here. The Kotel is this area over here. This is the Kotel, okay? This is Ir David. And the Mea Shiloch is this area over here. I'm going to show you a real picture in a second. I just wanted you to see in different colors the differences of the city borders, which is very cool. But the red is what we're talking about in the book of Ezra Nechemia. So when we say that he's going through the walls of Yerushalayim, we're not talking about what we have today. The black is what we have today. Okay, we're talking about a very small area, and this area, mind you, today is not even part of the Ir Atika. This is Ir David, the old Ir David that all the excavations are happening. You want to go and excavate with the tents and everything. That's this area over here. Okay, so just take a look at what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a very, very big area. Hence, it only took him really 52 days to go through and to fix up, which I think is very, very, very cool. I'm going to show you, this took a little bit of time trying to find the right proper maps, but I'll show you. Oh, and what I just did now, the red is the bigger area that Holdus created for Har HaBayit. Okay, so even Har HaBayit during the time of Nechemia is much smaller than it is today, that we have today. This is basically how it looks today. So as you can see, the red is the area of Yerushalayim that Nechemia is building up and going around right now, right? So Sha'ar Hagai, according to the map that I showed you in the beginning, is around over here. So he goes around here. Ein Sha'ar Ain is over here, and he goes all around, really seeing what he can do. And as you can see here, this no longer exists. This one that was probably done by Agrippas, the blue, no longer really exists. There is a little bit of wall left, but nobody really, it's not part of the Ir Atika. The purple is what was done by the Hashmonaim or Hordus. Again, this area over here is Ir David. And what we have today, the Ir Atika today, with the different quarters, is basically all the black, which is much, much bigger than the red. And that's really what we're talking about right now, just to give you kind of an idea of where we are. I made a mistake. If you can see here, the area of Har HaBayit here is very, very big. This is what Hordus actually created. Mishlo Ra Binyan Hordus Lo Ra Binyan Miyamav, right? Very famous ma'amar that exists. So really, it's supposed to cut off. It's supposed to start. The red is supposed to start a little bit more inside and end around over here, right? I did it based on today's Ir Atika, today's Har HaBayit. But I think this is a very cool map. And the most interesting thing to me is that the original Jewish quarter, Ir David, where David HaMelech basically established his own home and everything, is really this area over here, which is not even included in the old city today, which I think is very, very interesting. You can see the Kotel area is over here. This is the Kotel. Mamash, here is the Kotel. This is the Rechava of the Kotel. It's very cool. So let's go back to, let me just go back. Okay, so let's go back. So that's really what's happening right now in our perek. He's in a clandestine, secret way. He's going through the night, going through all of Ir Atika that we saw, the red portion, not the bigger Ir Atika that we have here. And he's doing it very, very subtly. He doesn't want to make any waves. And no one has a clue about what's going on. We are now in Pasuk Yud Daled. Va'evor el shar ha'ayin, ve'el brechat hamelech. Brechat hamelech is probably where Mea Shiloach is, which you saw was on all the way on the south end of the red area of Ir HaAtikah, the city of David, which is basically Yerushalayim in the period of Nechemia. Ve'en makom labehema lavor tachtai. What he's saying is that on the east side of the city, Nechemia goes through, and when he gets to the north, where it's the Brechat HaMelech, the fountain gate of the king's pool, his donkey that he was riding couldn't find any path through the rubble. And basically, it's the picture that Nechemia is painting is to tell us that it was really in ruins. And Ezra, don't forget, Ezra has been there for 13 years. Nechemia came 13 years after Ezra. Ezra didn't attend to the city walls at all. He was basically focusing on Torah, mitzvot, on the spiritual aspect of the people of Israel, the Judeans. Whereas Nechemia, the first thing he does after 3 days, not many months, 3 days, he gets to work to try to fix the actual walls that he sees are problematic, and he goes through with his donkey. Pasuk tetvav, va'ehi ole banachal laila, va'ehi shover b'chuma, ve'ashuv, ve'avo b'shar hagai, ve'ashuv. Then on the east side, when he finally gets to so he goes down into Shover Bachuma, most of the area of where Nachal Kidron is, all the way on the. I'll show you where we are in the Psukim. I'll just share my screen one more time. Basically, Nachal Kidron is over here, this area over here. So he's over in this area. The Mea Shiloach is over here on the bottom. Okay, we see my cursor over here. Okay, and he goes along the walls until he gets back to Shar Hagai. I'll go back to over here. Right, he goes back to Shar Hagai. He starts over here. Shar Hagai is, where's Shar Hagai? Here. Shar Hagai is over here, and unfortunately, he's having a hard time with his donkey, but he somehow succeeds in going around. He goes all the way around, possibly, and he finally gets back to Shar Hagai. So he basically went all around at nighttime. It took him, as you see, it's not very big. It took him a full night. And he succeeds in coming back all the way back to Shar Hagai. Pasuk Tet Zayin. V'hasganim lo yad'u ana halachti u'ma ani oseh ve'laYehudim ve'laKohanim ve'lachorim ve'lasganim u'liyeter osei hamelacha al ken ad ken lo higadeti. So he basically tells us none of the local officials knew where Nechemia has gone, or what he had been doing so far anyway. And he didn't say anything to anybody, not to the other Jews either, not to the priests, not to the Kohanim, not to the leaders, not to the officials, or anyone else who would be taking part in the work. He didn't want anybody to know. Kind of resembles, the Mossad, kind of resembles, in the beginning of 1948, when we were doing all these clandestine different missions, we didn't let anybody know anything because, let's face it, you didn't know who you can trust. You had the Haganah, the Etzel, the Lechi, you had so many different groups, and we have all these groups here. We have, as we saw, Sanballat, Tovia, Ha'amoni. They weren't just people; they were people that had armies, and he was afraid that if anything gets out, they're going to stop his work, or they're going to come pouring down and rain, more, fire and start a war of some sort, or even let the king know about what's going on. And therefore he didn't trust anybody. But there's an emphasis that he didn't even trust the Jews, the Kohanim either. One of the reasons is if you recall, if we go back to Sefer Ezra, and we, the last prakim, where he basically wants to go ahead and find out which families have intermarried. There are a lot of Kohanim families. So a lot of these families are intermarried with Sanballat, with with Tovia Ha'amoni, and therefore he really has to choose very carefully who he's going to trust, because the pool is very small. As it is, it's a very small area, as you saw in front of you, right? We're not talking about hundreds of thousands of people. When we discussed the Aliyah of Ezra, we were talking about all together in all of Israel and all the area of Yehuda and the outskirts, 50,000 Jews. That's it. So in the Ir Atikah, much less, right? So he doesn't trust anybody for good reason, because there's so many, mixed marriages, and he wants to continue the work that Ezra did of Taharat HaZerah. That's why he focuses only on the original Jewish quarter, which you saw before in the red area, because that's where the Jews lived, not outside. That's where the Jews lived. Pasuk Yud Zayin, Va'omar Alehem, Va'omar Alehem, Atem ro'im hara'a asher anachnu ba, asher Yerushalayim chariva u'sh'area nitztu ba'esh, לכו ונבנה את חומת ירושלים, ולא נהיה עוד חרפה. Pasuk Yud Zayin, I can only assume, it doesn't really come immediately in the story, immediately after Pasuk Tet Zayin. Tet Zayin, he basically just informed us that he went at nighttime, he didn't trust a lot of people, and he went just with a couple of people. And Pasuk Yud Zayin says now he's telling everybody that we need to fix the walls. He did his cheshbon, and he knows how much it's going to cost. He knows what it's going to take, and therefore he's telling everybody, we together, meaning even though he's a foreigner, he just, not 3 days ago did he come to Eretz Israel, to Eretz Yehuda. So there must have been some type of break, whether it's a day, a half a day, a weekend. Either way, he finally addresses the Jewish people, and he says to them, in Pasuk Yud Zayin, he says, see what trouble we have because Yerushalayim is in ruins, its gates are destroyed. Let's rebuild the city of Yerushalayim, the walls of Yerushalayim, and put an end to our disgrace. What disgrace is he talking about? Od chirpa. The disgrace of not being able to live as Jews. In a way, one can say this was the first attempt to build a shtetl, a Jewish area in the middle of a non-Jewish region, right? It's the first attempt to say, you know what? We need to build walls around the Jewish population so that we can separate ourselves from all these families. That's the first step we can do, is stop being intermarried, stop having friends, neighbors like that. At nighttime, we lock the doors, nobody can come in. And we choose who's allowed to come in. We don't leave at nighttime. We can't sleep at other homes at nighttime, right? It's the first attempt from a physical point of view for that separation. Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, hamavdil ben Yehudi leven hanochri. So it's in a way a solution that Nechemia finds to be very efficient to help the spiritual element as well. Spiritually, we know that there are mixed marriages, which is a difficulty for Zera Israel. So part of that is also separating them physically. And that's what he's basically saying. Od chirpa. The word chirpa is a disgrace not of the fact that it's just, a desolate city that doesn't have walls around it, but chirpa, disgrace, we're ruining Judaism. The whole idea of Ezra coming down with Shavei Tzion a little bit later, right, in 459, 457, 458, depends who we count, and Nechemia coming down 13 years later is to help rebuild the Jewish nation. And that's what he's trying to do. So that idea of chirpa is to separate. And that was the first Jewish quarter that in a way was the first shtetl in the middle of all of the different foreign nations, like Sanblat and Tuvia, and someone else we're about to meet in a minute by the name of Geshem Ha'aravi. So Pasuk Yudchet. So he finally gets out and says, he puts himself as part of them. I am part of you, though I'm your leader, I'm also part of you. And he says, we need to do this together. I'm with you. We are together in this pursuit to rebuild Judaism. Pasuk Yudchet, Pasuk 18, Va'agid lahem et yad Elohai asher hi tova alai, ve'af divrei hamelech asher amar li. Vayomru nakum uvaninu vayichazku yedehem letova. So Nechemia is relaying the story in first person, saying to us, I told them how God, he's a ish ma'amin, we mentioned that, he's a believer. He puts God first before anything else. How God has been with him and helped him the entire time. And what also the emperor, meaning Artaxerxes, basically also allowed him to do, gave him the license, the rishayon, to go ahead and have the authority to do and to build. And then they respond, let's start rebuilding. And they got ready to start the work. So even though Nechemia and Ezra are very, very different people, one is very into spirituality, one believes that this pursuit of rebuilding starts with the physical, in a way the tactics are similar. In the sense where, if you recall, Ezra was able to bring about the desire to reignite the covenant between Am Yisrael and HaKadosh Baruch Hu through convincing them that it comes from them, right? He tears, if you remember, he plucks his hair, he tears his garment, and he cries, and it makes an impression on them, and they say to him, we want to rebuild the covenant, to reestablish the covenant. Here too, he goes around. He must have also maybe even drew a map and showed them it's terrible here. There's still fire and ashes over here. It's ruined over here. How can we live this way? And he kind of like says, where's your Jewish pride? Jewish pride means we have a stronghold, a hold of a Jewish people in the midst of all these foreign people. Where are you? Where's your pride? And they say, you're right. We want to have this Jewish pride. And they say, we will go ahead. We want to build and rebuild. And they want to get ready, and they're ready for work immediately. So he's a very, very smart politician. Had he not done this at nighttime, rather, had they seen him actually going ahead and doing these charts, who knows? Maybe they would have heard the other nations, yelling at him, cursing them, and they would have maybe gotten scared, maybe back away from building. But this way, he comes and he has a solution. He already presents the problem, already mapped out. He knows exactly what to do. He's prepared, and he succeeds in having all of the Jewish people living in the Jewish quarter the red Ir Atikah that I showed you, and they all want to follow him. At this moment, where are all the other nations? Where are the other people living in the area, right? All the outside of the Jewish quarter, outside of the Ir Atikah. So all of a sudden we hear about Sanballat we met, Tovia we met, and then we're gonna meet another person by the name of Geshem Ha'aravi. So let's read Pasuk Yud Tet. Vayishma Sanballat Hacharoni v'Tovia Ha'eved Ha'amoni v'Geshem Ha'aravi. Geshem Ha'aravi, basically, he rules the south of Yerushalayim, right? So Sanballat is the governor of the north of the Shomron. Tuvia is the governor of the east, and Geshem is the governor of the south. There's no need for anybody to rule on the west, because that's Yam HaTichon, the Mediterranean, right? So there's nobody over there. So we basically have these three foreign people are basically surrounding Yerushalayim. That's what's really going on here. So now we understand why it's so important for Nechemia to build a stronghold, a fortress where just the Jews can finally rebuild and start their autonomy, as with their covenant with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Vayishma Sanballat Hacharoni v'Tovia Ha'eved Ha'amoni v'Geshem Ha'aravi vayal'igu lanu vayivzu aleinu vayomru ma hadavar hazeh asher atem osim ha'al hamelech atem mordim. Right? When Sanballat and Tovia and this Arab person named Geshem heard what we are planning to do, says Nechemia, they laughed, they ridiculed, right? Laughed at us. What do you think you're doing? They say to him. Are you going to rebel against the emperor? Same old, same old. We saw that also when Sheshbatzar and Zerubbabel came down in Shavet Zion, and the Shomronim also had a problem with that, and they sent letters to Kanbuzi, and Kanbuzi stopped the building. But also this current king, Artaxerxes himself, not 15 years ago, from the time Nechemia is here, before Ezra, right, also stopped the building of Yerushalayim. If you go back just for a second to Sefer Ezra, Perek Dalid, Pasuk Kaf Aleph, it's in Aramaic, so I will read it in Hebrew. He says, Ata tzavu lehafsik et avodat ha'anashim bahem. Stop building the city, not the walls, the actual Beit HaMikdash area, and you're doing your shiputz. Ha'ira lo tibaneh ad asher mimeni yenaten tzav. That's Artaxerxes. So the fact is that Artaxerxes has, in his own history, he's already stopped the building of Yerushalayim. Now I can understand why Nechemia never used the word and the name Yerushalayim when he tried to convince him to let him go and rebuild his own hometown. Had he said Yerushalayim, it could be that would have brought back the first command, the first tzav, the first letter where he said, "Seize all building of Yerushalayim." And if you recall, when we learn from Megillat Esther that when there's a document written by the Melech, what do we say? It's irreversible. You can't take it back. So now we can understand why Nechemia was very, very, very careful. Why he went at nighttime. He was afraid of this. He was afraid that they're going to that they see him actually going around making charts, and they realize that he's trying to rebuild Yerushalayim, the walls of Yerushalayim. They're going to stop him and say, you can't continue until, mapping around until we get the license and the okay from Artaxerxes. So what does he do? He wants to put them straight to work immediately. So there's no hesitation. That way, they start building. Then later on, you can say, oh, by the way, I also have the authority from Artaxerxes. So he's very, very politically oriented. He knows exactly what he's doing. And he's answering, and he already answered these three people, right? Sanballat, Tovia, and Geshem HaAravi. How does he respond? He doesn't respond the way we would think. The way he should have responded was, you know what? We're not rebelling against anybody because I have full authority from Artaxerxes. And he could, whip out the license. And here, it says right here, right? The Igeret. I have it. That's not what he does. Had he done that, the Jewish people would say, so our entire koach, our entire authorization comes from the Persian king. Well, they can go ahead. They're going to go to Shushan themselves. They'll walk over, or they'll gallop there. They'll get there. It'll take them a couple of months, and they'll persuade Artaxerxes to stop rebuilding Yerushalayim. Meanwhile, they'll come back, and we'll have to stop. So what does he answer them? Va'ashiv otam in pasuk kaf. Va'omar lahem Elohei hashamayim hu yatzliach lanu. First, it's our God, the God of Israel. You have absolutely no koach here. You have no power against our God. He is basically a religious man saying, this is God's will. You want to argue, you will fail. Then he continues to say, Va'anachnu avadav nakum uvaninu. And we, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, we are his avadim, nakum uvaninu. Right? Pasukaf. The God of heaven will give us success. We are his servants, and we are going to start building immediately. You can go ahead to Shushan. He doesn't tell them that he already has the authorization. But until he get there, it'll take time. And then, I stalled for a second. The half of this last pasuk is same old, the same machloket that exists until today. What does Nechemia say to all of these foreigners? He says to Sanballat, to Geshem HaAravi, and to Tovia, he says, V'lachem en chelek u'tzdaka ve'zikaron b'Yerushalayim. He says, you guys, you have no right to any property in Yerushalayim. You have nothing to do with Yerushalayim's tradition. It's the same fight we are fighting today, mamash. with the Arabs around us, that they have no rights to any of the property of Yerushalayim. Historically, I'm not talking about from the political point of view that they're already there, they've been living here for years, etc. Forget the politics. Historically, this is where it begins. Nechemia says, "Velachem, you have no right to the property of Yerushalayim." Doesn't get better than this. This is where it starts. We're talking about 443 BCE. There were no Arabs, no Muslims. Geshem Arabi were wanderers in the southern part, in the deserts of the Negev, right? No Muslims around. And he's already telling them, before the Muslims even existed, you have no rights to Yerushalayim. The right to Yerushalayim belong only to Am Yisrael. And that is why it is so important for Nechemia to start building a wall around Yerushalayim, about Har HaBayit and Ir David, to preserve a Taharat Yahadut, so that no one can get in, and they can lock the gates, and they can kick out all the foreigners. And that is the beginning of Nechemia's reign over Yerushalayim. The next Perek, Perek Gimel, is basically building the actual walls. And we'll see as they start building, they run into many problems, unfortunately, because these three very powerful men, they're not going to let Am Yisrael build. They're going to throw rocks at them. Does that sound familiar to you? Throwing rocks at Jewish people, Jewish laborers building Eretz Yisrael, building Yerushalayim. They're going to throw rocks. They're going to try to stab. They're going to try to kill. They're going to try to do whatever they can to ensure that we do not build Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. That is Perek Gimel, and also some of Perek Daled, which Be'ezrat Hashem we will see next week. So have a wonderful week, Shavua Tov, and enjoy yourselves and be healthy, everyone.